facility, equipment, and organization. The success of the parts department as a profit center, for that matter, any department, depends primarily on efficient use of its facilities, equipment, and physical and human resources. This chapter focuses on the parts department's working environment and the best organizational practices recognized as, let me call them, necessary conditions leading to success. Now, here's how we will proceed according to these learning outcomes. Define how branding strategies drive manufacturers' facility standards, and second is sort of an element of the same thing. Recognize the major considerations of facility design and layout. Facility standards and policies and procedures for operating practices, etc., are usually incorporated by reference into the franchise dealer sales and service agreement. And the third learning outcome, examine alternate operating practices in terms of part space requirements, and this very much deals with layout and how we receive and ship parts, etc., to determine what really is the most effective way of handling that. 4. Identify how business goals and objectives affect personnel planning and staffing. There's kind of a management maxim that says structure follows strategy. And that means in order to know how to build the organization, I really need to first define what it is that I'm trying to accomplish. And then I can design a structure and bring the right kind of people into the organization to achieve that. And 5, appraise the dynamics of dealership interdepartmental cooperation. Operating as a cohesive team between parts and service particularly is a challenge in the profit center setting, and we'll see what some of the priorities should be there. Now, how do franchisors or manufacturers, distributors, let me call it that, determine facilities requirements? Well, let me start off with this heading, and there's a concept called market area of influence, and of course the dart thrower is tongue-in-cheek, but it is inspired by comments I heard sometimes when out in the field during the 80s, which was a time of significant expansion of dealer networks in Canada. It would come from dealer principals distressed about new dealer appointments uncomfortably close to their market area of influence. Like, how do you guys make those decisions where to put a new dealer, throw a dart at the map? Well, no, it's not as informal as that. The process is much more formal and driven by the analysis of what is typically called market representation by manufacturers. It starts with determining specific market share goals and then the number and size of dealers in the market area to achieve them. And the key criteria for determining the type of dealership needed and where is then based on so-called planning potential. So what we see here, manufacturers will have specific detailed facilities requirements for their franchise dealers, commonly based on planning potential. And planning potential is a widely used conservative estimate of annual new vehicle sales volume, principally based on actual new car registration in the dealership's area of sales responsibility for the preceding 3 to 5 calendar years, that market area of influence that we talked about. It doesn't necessarily mean that this will be exactly what the dealer will be expected to sell, that planning potential number. In fact, in a growing market, actual new vehicle sales may be substantially above planning potential, but it is the basis of market representation and defining what facility would serve that market need. So let's look at market representation criteria. It starts with defining the market area of influence, and usually done by Polk, RL Polk's Canadian vehicle registrations, and that can be broken down into postal code areas, and the postal code area then lets us assemble a geographic region that we can call that's a market area of influence that we're working with. Then we establish some market share goals of a given percentage area new vehicle sales in that defined area, and then determine the number of units to be sold in the prime market area to achieve those market share goals. And then the next two determine desired dealer size by annual sales volume or local market conditions, and then determine the number of dealers required to achieve target sales volume. Of course, then appoint dealers based on these criteria. Now, let me explain this a bit more specifically. Let me use an imaginary market area of influence. Well, let me use Barrie. That's the home of the automotive business schools. And I'm making up these numbers to illustrate it, but let's say we sell 20,000 new vehicle sales annually in that market area of influence. Let's say the manufacturer overall has a market share goal of 5% of the market. Well, if we sell 20,000 units in that area, 5% would be 1,000 units. So we need to have the capacity to sell 1,000 new vehicles in the Barrie area. Now, whether we'll try to appoint one dealer or two depends on suitable prospects in the area and available investment capital. And I'll show you in a moment when we get to some facility standards guides. There's a dramatic difference between a 500 unit a year dealership and a 1,000 unit a year dealership. So what's available? What kind of prospects are available in local market, and what in desirable locations, what kind of properties, land and is available, etc. Okay, now that then would be the basis of that market presentation. Now this here is a page from a prominent importer's facility standards guide summarizing minimum facility requirements overall. This is sort of the covering page, and you can see I said a moment ago 500 and 1,000 units. Well, a 500 unit planning potential dealer would have over 1.5 acres of property, well, almost 3 acres of property in 1,000. Well, that may or may not be available in a desirable location. And then in terms of total site area, land and buildings, total office space, etc. Well, here we have 72,000 square feet with 125,000 square feet, etc. Okay, so there's a very significant difference. This here is, as I said, the summary page, new vehicle showroom, sales office, total sales area, number of service bays, new car delivery bays, service reception, customer waiting, and then parts department here. And I refer you specifically, because we'll come back to that later, the note 5 here. The number of notes needs to be approved by the manufacturer prior to commencement of constructions, and minimum considerations that go into it. But note 5, draw a system, and this refers to parts department, where you see two sizes for the 500, 2,000 and 1,600 square feet, 3,200 and 2,560. Drawer system is highly recommended, and drawer systems are high-density storage drawers which are particularly useful in densely storing fairly small parts. They really use volume, cubic space very efficiently, and that could reduce the guide by 20%. It also says a mezzanine floor can count towards this requirements. If I have enough ceiling height and put a second level into the parts department, then the square area is served in terms of usable square area. So these are key considerations. And I'll come back to that when we talk about some of the factors affecting base requirements in a moment. Now, let me show you a second facility standards guide, and this is from another prominent importer specific parts department facility standards guide. And note particularly how it links in this franchise the planning volume with planning units in operation that are the foundation of doing forecasts, etc. And you can see that's 5 times the planning volume that would be considered the units in operation. Apparently it is based on the expectation that the dealer will have customer retention predominantly in the first 5 years of vehicle age. So that's the units in operation to forecast future business potential. Apparently it's now more like 5-6 years, because average age of vehicles is getting older, but that's an interesting connection here with that manufacturer. So you can see in the parts administration office, parts managers, retail counter, technician counter, parts storage, parts receiving. You see here 2,000 and 4,000 in the 500 category, category, 2,000 in the 1,000 category, 4,000 if I come back to the previous one, 500 category, 2,000 but can be reduced by 20%, 3,200 can be reduced to 2,560. So they're different kind of priorities. This franchise probably has a broader vehicle mix, a more differentiated vehicle lineup, so it probably needs a bit more space to serve the broader model lineup out there. And then total building, that's overall, but total land area here, 2,200 square feet and 3,100 square feet, and total building area, 2,644, 4,801. Okay, so this is Facility Standards Guide, and as indicated, they are usually incorporated by reference into the dealer sales and service agreement. That dealer will meet such and such standards. Now, let me move on to this particular slide, and it has the heading of Parts Facilities Guide. Now, this is just that, a guide. It depends on the actual facility layout, preferred operating practices, the sales mix, for example, is the huge wholesale business, etc. But here are some of the observed layout and equipment practices in the cross-section of dealerships, and this is from market research. So in reference to the required parts area, well, how many regular bins, how many bulky bins, how many other bins and racks, and regular bins 12 inches deep, bulky bins are 18, 24, and 36 inches deep. So by size of parts area, you need X of these bins. Other bins and racks, they might be things like moldings, tires and wheels, exhaust pipes, things that take up an unusual amount of space just by their simple configuration. And again, that depends on the size. And here, counter linear feet for the wholesale retail counter and for the shop counter requirements, and it's a best practice as the two must be separated because clearly technicians' time is money and they can't be held up by, I'm serving a customer right now, so wholesale retail and shop counter must be separated. And shipping and receiving area, that's again a guide. I've already referenced if I'm doing a huge wholesale business, clearly I need to be able to serve that business, and while much of the wholesale business probably moves in and out fairly quickly, but still there has to be the right kind of shelf space to stock those parts that are typical wholesale orders as opposed to just using special orders to serve the wholesale business. So clearly that affects shipping and receiving area. And then office space is usually dependent on, well, certainly best practice says that the parts manager's office should be in a strategic location where he or she can view the aisles. That's a kind of a security effort. Okay. Now this next one is again an average space allocation guide, and again these data come from observed layout and equipment practice in a cross section of dealerships. A time-honored method to determine where should what go and what space should it occupy is to use graph paper of the exact facility dimension, particularly if it's not directly rectangular, if it has angles to it, and then again specific cutouts of the footprint of equipment, and that of course in scale to be used, and then shuffle them around on the graph paper. And I'm obviously dating myself by saying that. I know today there's computer assisted design or CAD software to do that, but use what you're comfortable with to lay out your floor space to where you feel this is the most efficient layout. Now, a couple of key observations before we look more specifically at factors affecting parts, storage area layout, and space requirements. And here the three specifically outlined. The critical facility dimension for parts storage capacity is not necessarily square footage, but usable and utilized cubic footage. In other words, if I have a wide open shelf with one or two pieces on and lots of airspace above, that's clearly not effective use of the space. But where I utilize most effectively cubic footage by rearranging shelves or by putting pieces into a shelf where they most efficiently fit, that clearly then affects the requirements. Things like mezzanine floor that I earlier alluded to, location system, high density drawers that we earlier talked about. This enables or prevents specific choices. Second one is parts capacity is affected not only by the size of the required inventory, the working capital investment to get the right number of turns based on a given level of sales, but also by the quality of the inventory. If much of what you have is obsolete, you need more space to serve the active business. That's clearly the implication. The third item is inventory's working capital. We've emphasized that repeatedly from the perspective of effective management of that working capital. There are a number of things critical to return an investment. And I'll move to the next slide and let me compare and contrast these two columns. On the left-hand side, the kinds of operating conditions that increase the requirements of square footage, and on the right-hand side, the kinds of operating practices that decrease square footage requirements. So let me compare and contrast. We've talked about inventory quality a moment ago. If I have excess inventory, obsolete inventory, low inventory turns, and ineffective parts special order practices, a lot of orders that serve customer needs need to come from special orders. These four are probably part of the same thing. That clearly ties up space and leads to requirements to have to have some place to put all of this redundant stuff. Effective inventory management practices obviously are the opposite to that, and we've talked about that in other parts of this course. Next is that high-density storage equipment that we looked at, looking at that importer's facility standards guide. Clearly recognize that high-density drawers and things that really efficiently use cubic space will reduce the space required. Next is, let me move to the area of inefficient storage and layouts, whereas here efficient layout and store design. Clearly, if I haven't been using my square footage effectively because maybe there's posts in the way and things like that, that clearly has some implications on square footage requirements. And then here, bin extensions and quarter bins, and I earlier talked about 12 inches, 18 to 36 inches, etc. By the way, in the parts business today, all of these equipment shelves are today customarily still quoted in inch dimensions, not in metric dimensions. I suppose much like housing constructions, we talk about 2x4s and stud length things and 4x8 sheets of plywood and things like that. The same custom continues in the parts business. And the bin extensions are the typical shelf is 84 inches high, and this would add another 1.5 feet or 18 inches on top of the shelf unit, and that adds about 25% to the capacity for storage, and that's where the term quarter bins comes from. One of the downsides of doing that, usually a 7-foot or 84-inch high shelf, most people can reach that without aid of a stool or something like that, but certainly when you use quarter bins, you need stepping stools to get up there, and that adds a bit of complication to the ease of filling orders. Now, I've talked about mezzanine floor capability, and over here the opposite is parts area height limitations. If you have 84-inch bins, you need, that's 7 feet, you need about 16, 17 feet of ceiling height in order to make a mezzanine second floor feasible. It would be graded steel stair up, and then second graded steel level, and then shelves there, and that clearly doubles basically the floor capacity in terms of whatever the dimension of the mezzanine shelving is. So parts limitations and mezzanine floor capacity are linked together. Now, there is something in here, I've already emphasized that, large counter retail and wholesale business, and large is usually defined in the industry as something over 35-40%, where the manufacturer has lucrative wholesale compensation programs, so there's an aggressive wholesale sales force out there and calling on the trade, and that clearly needs space, so that increases square footage. Now, here's a line in quotation marks, planographing and sizographing. It's still called that today, at least by old-timers like me, it's still called that. That basically means I'm looking at the frontal view of a row of shelves. And in that view, I have in mind certain dimensions, package dimensions of the specific parts that go on that shelf. And how do we arrange the shelf height and the distance between shelf levels, etc., best to use the space most effectively? And I'll give you an example of how powerful the effect of that is. And I know today there's, again, CAD, computer-assisted design software to do that. When I was at the wholesale side of the business and responsible for parts and service, we had the unfortunate directive from our mother house. We had bought property and were in process of designing a new head office and parts distribution center, and then the head office pulled the plug on it because of economic circumstances. So we were in a situation where we had a parts distribution center that was already well beyond capacity, and we used off-site storage for bulky parts like sheet metal parts and exhausts and things like that. So now we were confronted where we are. This has to last another 3 to 5 years, and we were a bit stressed about that. And we called on the aid of an architectural firm whose expertise was to do warehousing design and also efficient warehouse and consulting capability for efficient warehouse layouts. And the first meeting we had with them, they said, do you have a file, hopefully an electronic file, but a hard copy file is suitable too, of the dimension of every single part in your part system? I said, I have no idea, never asked, but I'll find out. Went to the corporate office and said, do we have that? Yes, we had it both in hard copy and in electronic file. They ran that through their CAD software, and in the process also they changed, and I'll come back to that, what that means, the location system. We were using group numeric to bin location systems, and by the time they were finished and had recommended a new layout, and we really rearranged the shelves to work with this layout, we had freed up what basically was about 30% of the shelf area, and we were just absolutely couldn't believe that was possible, because we thought we were pretty good warehouse people, but it freed all of that space up. So that's planning graphing and sisographing. And what made it work is, first of all, knowing the dimensions and where does it fit best, that particular dimension part, and secondly, the rearrangements of the shelves to accommodate that. And here you see group numeric location system. Parts people, particularly the dealer level, love that, because it means I have shelf row A, B, C, D, however many. In that shelf row A, I have shelf unit 1, shelf unit 2, shelf unit 3, etc., however many. And then I have shelf level 1 and unit 1, shelf level 2 and unit 2. So when they look up a part number in the system and see by the numeric sequence, okay, that will probably be in row C, 2 shelf units down on the third level. Easy. It's wonderful for quick location, and sometimes also suitable for grouping specific shelf sizes, because sometimes the parts have similar dimensions, etc. But it really does not use the space most effectively, because if my next shelf space in numerical sequence is a 36-inch deep shelf, and I have on that maybe just a couple of cardboard bin boxes that are a foot long, and that's where the part fits. Clearly, the rest of it is wasted airspace. In the bin location system, that says basically where is the best place to put that in the shelf, or how do I rearrange my shelf heights, etc., for this to really use the full space. And that clearly is the better use of cubic space, but one of the key downsides, and that's why often parts people at the dealer level don't like that, every time you look up a part number, it could be anywhere on the shelf because it's by bin location, so you have to look up also the location. And particularly, I've always said, print out a hard copy of the bin locations, because if the system is ever down, you won't find a thing. So that's the pros and cons, but it's powerful effect, particularly in the context of that planographing, sisographing discussion. It really has the ability to free up space and use cubic space to the fullest. Okay, now we change pace and move to review issues of organizations. And this is the realm of human resources management. And the first part is personnel requirements assessment. A professional manager plans ahead to assess the department's needs with respect to the staff requirements to support current and planned future business. And this kind of framework to assess the needs is illustrated here. At the core of it is, I guess, what's in the center here: goals, objectives, desired results. We've repeatedly emphasized that planning and performance management involves setting measurable goals and objectives, etc. Okay, so that's at the heart of service resources and human resources management. Next is the product here, where they're all interrelated. If you have a weak product, that affects the processes and your delivery of after-sales service. But the product is the realm of the manufacturer, and the parts, you get your parts directly from the manufacturer, or maybe some from independent part sources you've lined up, but that's really their realm. Is you get what you have to work with here. And the next is really about this particular topic, personnel management. And that tries to align people and processes with the goals of the organization. And people bring skills, they bring knowledge, they bring attitude and talent, and that very much defines organizational culture. It defines how effective they are in achieving those stated goals and objectives, and whether I have the right skill set and knowledge in order to do what my current strategy is that may have changed. And on the right, we have processes, we have systems, we have programs that they work with, and we have a performance management process that tries to monitor our progress. Now, here is one of the fundamentals, as the header calls it, and I already alluded to it in the discussion of the learning outcomes. This maxim, this management dictum, let me call it, was first articulated by Alfred Chandler, and Alfred Chandler was a Harvard University business historian, and it says, structure follows strategy, and that means to know who will be the right person for a job, whether that means assigning someone inside within the organization, or if you're expanding and you need new people, you need to know first what you expect that person to do, and then hire the right kind of person that fills that need. And let me use an example. Are you, for example, looking for a counter person that has outstanding selling skills because you have a wholesale retail selling strategy that is a new focus in your business? Well, that means you make sure it's the reputation this particular new employee comes with. One that has a proven administration skills. Maybe we have problems with some record keeping and we need a details person to make sure that we improve in that area, or perhaps one that shines in terms of customer engagement. Strategy determines the ideal candidate, not his or her credentials. And that's what I said earlier. Human resources planning requires you to anticipate the labor needs of your department, and not just the number of bodies we need, but what skill sets they have to come with and what knowledge they have to bring to bear on the kinds of things that you have targeted as your business model or business plan. Now, the tool for formalizing skill requirements is the job description. And as indicated here, the appendix to the chapter 7 here in your text contains selected job descriptions that are industry templates, I would say, of job descriptions. It has the parts manager, assistant parts manager, parts counter person, a shop parts counter person as a differentiated counter person, and the parts driver. So if no available job description template serves your needs, use this blank job description worksheet shown to outline unique requirements. And I guess that's typically what a job description should entail: title, the name of the individual, the department that person works in, reports to, that's a clear requirement to know who's my boss, major performance expectations, and they deal largely with what we are trying to accomplish. Then duties and responsibilities are the things that need to be done in order to accomplish those performance expectations. Qualifications required in order to best position that person to succeed, the performance standards, how will I measure whether we have succeeded, and then special requirements. They may involve things like must be bondable or has to have a driver's license or whatever, valid driver's license. These are the kinds of things that feed into there. Now we get to performance management. One of the notorious side effects of running dealership departments as individual profit centers is to create, let me call it, functional silo mentality, particularly where strong incentives on gross and operating profit results are involved. And this creates barriers to cooperation where department managers most negatively lapse into the you worry about your department, I worry about mine mode. So get out of my way. I have my own empire here to rule. Now, this business is hard enough even without these additional constraints created by these negative dynamics in the organization. So bringing an after-sales perspective to the business means operating as a team, parts and service cooperation. Clearly, parts and service absolutely need each other. Part needs service as its most important customer, the internal customer in this case. Service needs parts in terms of good part supply to meet its service objectives of serving customers quickly with a minimum of inconvenience and right the first time. So operating as a cohesive team certainly is conducive to that. Fighting and being in the defensive mode of protecting your turf clearly does not. And that's part of the problem, that profit center management has the downside of encouraging tunnel vision. And when I say tunnel vision, it means compartmentalized kind of operation. And departmentalized, yes, that's the natural profit center focus, but not compartmentalized. In other words, stay out of my realm here. This is you worry about your business, I worry about mine. In a dysfunctional dealership, here is what happens. And I'm assuming with this here that, let's say there's some tension between the shop parts counter person and technicians, and I'll use this as an example, that the technicians has 2 minutes per hour time wasted because he can wait. I'm not rising to the occasion as quickly as I could if I were more focused on providing the best service. So let's say this is certainly realistic, that 2 minutes per hour is wasted. For an 8-hour day, that's 16 minutes, 5 days a week, by 50 weeks per year. That's 4,000 minutes. Divide that by 60 to turn it into hours, so 66 2/3 hours. If the technician is paid $22 an hour, 66.67 by 22 is $1,467 a year. This is per technician. Let's say you have 6 technicians. So 6 times 1467 is 8,802. And this is the overall cost of the productivity loss that's being generated here. That's a direct cost. But there's an opportunity cost to that too. If this time were sold at retail, and let's say the 66.67 hours by 6 technicians by $100 an hour, if that happens to be my charge out rate, that is 40,000 and 002, so around $40,000 of lost revenue. This is the opportunity cost that dysfunctional relationship creates. So clearly, when you look at that drives home the point. Interdepartmental cooperation and working as a cohesive team is absolutely essential. There is a cost to it if that does not exist. Now, the most common issue prone to frustrate harmonious working relationships are lack of communication. In other words, there's not really an effort made to stay in touch with each other. In the parts and service setting, warranty or special policy adjustments that are necessary, some write-offs, who pays for that? A subtle one, lack of empathy. I really don't appreciate the other person's priority in the major focus they have. Maybe special order parts and VOR procurement. We've indicated in another context that non-stock parts in stock, the special order parts that die on the shelf and gather dust, are predominantly a service department generated problem, so that's a source of tension. And the most subtle, and usually one I've always pointed out to dealer principals when questions arose, what's the problem here? Adverse incentives. And let me explain that, adverse incentives. The parts manager gets a bonus for achieving, let's say that's the incentive. Parts manager gets a bonus for achieving a gross profit margin, which is a gross profit percentage goal. In other words, dollar gross profit divided by sales, gross profit percentage. The parts manager has the opportunity to buy promotional parts because there's a special promotional parts campaign for fast-moving items by the manufacturer at an added discount. Now, it would be ideal time for the parts manager to go to the service manager and say, hey, I can buy in bulk at some really attractive prices. These things we sell regularly. Maybe we can use it to put together a service special, let's say brake pads or something like that, to take on the traditional aftermarket player across the street that usually beats us on price by menu pricing. I'll give you some of that discount I can get, and you maybe discount some of your labor, and we menu price it to really take that competition head on. Well, what incentive does the parts manager have to share this pricing flexibility with the service department? The moment he says, I'll share with you some of this discount, gives away some gross profit percentage, and that means money out of his or her pocket. So that's a classic example of an adverse incentive where the parts manager is more likely to just let me keep quiet about that. Let me just buy these at a discount by my normal quantity and not tell the service manager about the campaign because otherwise it takes money out of my pocket. So the slide that's up there in team building concept is there are some time-honored concepts on how to build a cohesive team. Focus on common goals. Well, different departments have different goals and they don't necessarily coincide. There may be even different pet projects in each department that have the potential to clash with each other. So unless we understand the overall focuses of the business, and that should take an overall dealership focus, that really we are all in the same organization and we need to maximize the outcomes for the dealership, not necessarily just for the department, then organizations have the potential to become dysfunctional. Open communication. We already talked about common issues that frustrate harmonious working relationships. One is lack of communication. Unless employees are free to speak up, even if, or maybe particularly if, what they have to say might be unpopular, usually problems don't get solved. They're either ignored or swept under the carpet, and that's one key element of organization becoming dysfunctional. There are obvious things there, nobody tackles them, and people resort to protecting their turf, to keeping their head down. That too shall go away, kind of counterproductive working habits, unless it's articulated and we have the issue on the table, then we know how to solve that problem that it creates. And that really gets into the third one, solve problems. Everybody recognizes a full-blown crisis, but problems don't start out as a crisis. They usually occur and then intensify. So once there is a general consensus that there are obvious problems there that are not being tackled, you get into the counterproductive attitudes. Well, if they, quote unquote, won't do anything about it, why should I care? I just do my thing and let them worry about it. And I usually used to hate that term, they. They. This is us. The organization is all of us making up that department. And if there is a problem, it's not them against us. It's us having to focus on solving that problem. And then provide leadership. That's the final one. Dealer principal really is the source of leadership, or general manager, where that's the key to overall management. The dealer principal's interest in the fixed operation can be presupposed. Most recognize that the fixed operations is my principal profit center, and particularly in the parts department, parts inventory is a major capital investment, ties up working capital that nobody wants to protect more than the dealer principal. The parts and service manager clearly, as we've already emphasized, need to cooperate. They need each other to serve their business most effectively. They need each other for promotional purposes. They are clearly on the same side in terms of providing an effective after-sales service experience. How does salesperson, vehicle sales manager, how do they all fit? Well, a salesperson may have some issue where maybe a used vehicle salesperson as a customer in the showroom saying, yeah, I want to get that and I want to take it tonight, but it has a broken mirror. Can you have somebody install that? And let's say it's towards the end of the day and they go to the service department and say, well, no, I'm done for the day. I won't help. Nobody stays there for the half an hour to help, or nobody's there to check out a mirror to do that. So vehicle sales manager and the parts manager are particularly essential to each other in the accessories business, because often accessorizing new vehicle sales on the showroom floor is a fundamental element of an effective accessories program. So there's a lot of areas where cohesive team relationships really make the business substantially more effective. So how do you create an environment that motivates people to perform? Well, let me first give you a short, as I call it here, primer on motivation. And it starts off with, you cannot motivate anyone. So obvious retort to that is, so why the heck are we talking about motivation if you're telling me I can't do anything about it? Well, wait a moment, I'll modify that or qualify that with a second statement. All people are motivated. Maybe get the retort and have gotten that and say, well, look, I have some guys that are sick at least one day a month and late twice a week, and you're telling me they're motivated? Well, yes, they are motivated. They're more motivated to be sick once a month and late twice a week than be consistently present and on time. But they're motivated by something. Every functioning human being has to have some motives to take action, and that's what motivation is about. So that clearly then gets me to the third thing. People do things for their reasons, not yours. And understand particularly, motivation is not something you do to people, but it is to understand what it is that gets specific employees in your area of responsibility highly self-motivated, and then to the extent possible provide the environment where they achieve that. So here is what is recognized to create such a motivational environment. And it has a couple of key elements. Help create an atmosphere that encourages, supports, and sustains improvement. A supportive atmosphere, in other words, if something goes wrong or we are struggling to achieve something and we get the right kind of resources or the help from someone to achieve that, that clearly is that a powerfully motivational environment that people are not told to sink and swim. They know there's help available if I need some help, then instead of having to embarrass myself or discourage myself. Second and third are elements of the same thing. Be sensitive to variations in employees' needs, abilities, and goals. One size does not fit all. Different people have different kind of needs, priority goals in their life, and that shapes what it is that motivates them. And the third, know what kind of incentives or rewards are most effective for each individual employee. And let me illustrate that for those of you who know of Maslow's, Abraham Maslow, a Harvard University business professor, his hierarchy of needs. It's one of the classic motivational theories. If we look at the upper level needs identified, level 3, social and belonging, level 4, status and esteem, level 5 was self-actualization, the first two of safety and security and physiological needs they're assumed to be served in our society today. So these three that are really higher level needs. Well, let me give you some examples of what I'm talking about. Let me say there's somebody who's on that level 3, social and belonging. That would be classically the kind of person that wants to be liked, wants to do nice things for people, wants to see themselves in a role where they create a good atmosphere because that's part of that social and belonging atmosphere. Well, let him or her organize let's say, the next company picnic. They love doing this kind of thing. It makes people happy, and we get together and we enjoy each other's company. That would be a classic, highly targeted kind of incentive, or a variation to engage that particular employee. Let me say, for the status and esteem level, maybe I have a superstar parts counter person who has the ambition to become parts manager at some point. I'm not going anywhere, so how do I keep that person with that ambition continue to work here? And well, maybe one way is make him or her the assistant parts manager, give him that title. That clearly would be fitting that personal need of status and esteem, and hopefully keep him around for longer until perhaps he or she moves out to become that parts manager somewhere else. 5, that the self-actualization to explain means that that individual that's motivated at level constantly strives to be the best he or she can be. Well, classically, these kind of people, give him or her challenging assignments to do. They thrive on that, to test themselves and to prove to the world that they're peak efficiency kind of professionals. So that has to do with the motivational environment. So the motivation is not a skill to do something to people. The skill is in being able to identify what it is to self-motivate my employees, and then how to translate that knowledge into creating a motivational environment. Now, let me wrap this topic up by briefly revisiting what we've previously touched on in discussions on setting SMART, S-M-A-R-T, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, target-dated goals and objectives. 3 major steps are the mainstay of performance management. First one is performance planning, and that is all about those SMART objectives, and then those SMART, measurable, achievable, realistic, target-dated objectives, how we tie it into our performance management system. That may be management by objectives or some other process. Second is day-to-day coaching, and then third, performance measurement. Performance measurement or annual performance appraisal, whatever process is used. They're all equally important, although in practice they're not always given equal weight in organizations. And in fact, if you look at organizations, just about everybody does an annual performance appraisal because that's necessary to look at salary reviews, etc. But you can't do that effectively, the performance measurements, unless you have measurable goals. And then the day-to-day coaching is probably the area that gets least emphasized and should have the greatest emphasis. Because if the performance appraisal at the end of the year simply is based on likes and dislikes, it has the potential largely just to alienate people, not really to become a tool for performance management. It starts with knowing exactly how we measure performance, and that starts with SMART goals and objectives and measurement. And then it should never come as a surprise to an employee during the performance appraisal period, if it's at the end of the year or whether it's even more frequent, that they did not meet a given performance goal. Why? Because where were you during the course of the period in your day-to-day coaching, in your follow-up to check, we are 6 months through the year and have achieved only 35% of the goal. Well, clearly we're not on target, and we need to find out why. Why is that? What do you need additional resources? Are there some constraints? Is the goal still realistic, or should it be redefined, etc.? So finally then, day-to-day coaching is really the element that makes that overall process work. And in the performance measurement final stage, combine the performance appraisal with establishing the next evaluation period's goals and objectives that then goes back into the performance planning stage. Needless to say, we've just scratched the surface of the body of knowledge on leadership, on motivation, and on performance management. I trust what we've reviewed here will at least help to whet your appetite to continue to expand and refine your management and leadership skills. And this is an ongoing process for the true professional.